Welcome to Proudly Out of Line. I'm Marty Moore, an old school dyke and the CEO of Boulder-based Rocky Mountain Equality. With everything going on around us in this world right now, it's the perfect time for all of us to be engaged, informed, and hopefully have a little fun along the way. On with the show. Welcome, listeners, to the second season, the first episode of Proudly Out of Line by Marty Moore. So glad to have you with us again. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Mayor Duane Gurulé of Rocky Ford, Colorado. For those of you who know me well, you know I'm from southeastern Colorado, and that's where a lot of my heart and my cowboy boots come from. I grew up in a little town called Los Animas, which is about 30 miles away from where Rocky Ford is and the mayor that we'll be talking to. I know a lot about rural Colorado. I know about the discrimination. I know about the lack of water, and I know about the lack of economy. I hope we'll touch on that. I will say to our listeners, and to our guests, that this is a C3 podcast. But I will mention, this is not an endorsement, but I will mention that the mayor is running for a seat in the legislature. So I think that maybe some of his answers will be framed in what all the big things he's talking about, but we're going to keep it to the mayor's elected position. Welcome, sir.
Marty, thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to join you this morning.
I'm not aware of any other pride proclamation out of the Arkansas Valley, ever. I moved to Los Animas when I was 18 months old. I left there 2 days after I graduated from high school in 1980. I've been back and forth some, but have never really lived there since. And one of the things I know about growing up in rural Colorado, my experience, and I've heard it from others, is that you don't get to see anybody that is like you. For all kinds of reasons, which I hope we can go into some. But in my story, I grew up thinking, and there's the words that I used on myself, that I was a pervert. Because that's what I heard from the church, that's what I read in books, that there was something wrong with me for having the feelings that I had. It took until I got to the University of Denver and met others like me, where some of the shame and the self-hate started disappearing. I think a lot of us carry that with us throughout a lifetime based upon that experience. But when I saw the Facebook post that you, sir, and all but one of the town council voted for a very meaningful and pride proclamation and posted that, I started crying. What got you there?
I know it was something that was, a long time coming, and, I think this is the third year of a group down here organizing a Seco Pride event. So they've been doing that over in Lamar, and some of the organizers are, actually live here in Rocky Ford. But I was, happy to have joined that event, the first event, and then last year, and coming up on the third event. And the organizers had reached out and asked if this was something that we'd be willing to do. And, I'm not sure if there were attempts in Lamar or any of the other communities, but when that request came, it was a really easy yes. And, it wasn't something that I had thought of, that there's a lot going on, and, but anytime something like this is brought to us, and that's really, the whole point of my role is in leading our community. And it's not, in me coming up with all the ideas or coming up with all the answers, but really just being open and willing to listen. And I think with that, the community being comfortable reaching out and, asking, making those requests. So like I said, it was an easy yes. We did this, I did it in a different way. I did this. Proclamations are made by the mayor or made by the presiding person, whether it's the governor, the mayor, whatever that kind of role is. So proclamation.
He's frozen.
So they can just be made. But I knew that if I just brought that forward and said, hey, we're going to do this, it would have really, really shifted to a focus on me and my beliefs and that. So I really wanted to do this where we did have, council's approval on this. Majority is what we need. And I felt really good about that. I knew I was actually kind of anticipating two, but we only had one that was not willing to give his yes to this. So that last meeting was just passing the proclamation, and tomorrow we're actually going to be presenting the proclamation formally. So really excited about that.
Where and when is that happening?
Yeah, so it'll be during tomorrow evening's regular city council meeting. So during our presentations section, we will be presenting the formal proclamation, printed up really nice and framed to the Seco Pride organization.
I've been watching your town council meetings just because I like entertainment. Wow. But I'll make sure that I dial in tomorrow night to do that. And I do have to say that Rocky is somebody that I've known well for, 15 years, was my accountant at one point. And after I saw the proclamation, he let me know that he and others had been in contact with you. So a shout out to Rocky and all that he does for Southeastern Colorado.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there an LGBT presence? Like if I was walking down the street in Rocky Ford today, are there any flags flying anywhere?
No. You will see one at Bloom Coffee Shop, and that's where where I'm joining you from today. And Bloom, it may be the only one, but it does have some strong presence in the community. It's right on Main Street, right across from City Hall, right next to the fire station, the police station. So you can't miss it. But no, and that is something that I think when you think of is there a presence, we know that we know our community, and we know the people in our community, and there's probably a lot who have just been afraid or just picked the battles and chose not to display, not to call that attention. But we know each other, and we know everyone. And when we look at the other side of I guess of the aisle, we do see a lot of those flags flown comfortably, and it's yeah. So I hope that this can be that little barrier or big barrier. I'm not sure which it is that's broken, that will let people know, hey, it's okay. We haven't got our windows broken out yet. That's kind of in the back of the mind. We do have the flag up on the big I don't know how large the windows are, but big front retail windows. But of course, those are kind of some of the things going through my mind of, is this going to happen? And also, we have insurance, so
Yeah, there you go.
If it is, then yeah, I guess we can get there when we get there.
Yeah, yeah. Growing up, and so you grew up, you were a Millionaire, right?
Yeah.
So I'm a Trojan. I graduated from Los Alamos High School. And you guys are better at wrestling, and it still annoys me, but whatever. And so in all of that, like I would assume a Rocky Ford kid's experience of the time was the same as my experience of the time. So cisgendered girls like me were referred to as tomboys, which is not. You can't use that today easily without getting some blowback on it. But I was a tomboy. And that was the language my mom could use, and my grandparents and friends. That Mardi, she's always riding horses or motorcycles. Can't get her inside to sew or cook. And and that was somewhat acceptable, right? They throw me in a dress for Sunday church, and oh, the pain of all that. But get through that. But gay boys had the intense bullying. There was no cover for some cisgender boy who's more effeminate. It's like we're cowboys, we're ranchers, we're farmers. We're not going to take any of that sissy. That was a common word, right? Sissy, as somebody was getting beaten up or dismissed. Is that still the case in rural Colorado today with the kids in school?
I want to dare to say no, and I think I can safely say not, for sure, not at the same, not the same way. I do believe, and maybe it's just Colorado. Maybe that is, a good thing of our Board of Education, being at the state level, because there is still, policies in place that might not make it to some of the little districts if it wasn't. But now I have two older stepchildren who graduated high school, so I got to kind of watch that journey, and now I have a middle schooler and an elementary age, and kind of get to see that now, and also again knowing some of their friends and the families. I do feel like it's changed, and that same that bullying isn't there. Bullying still exists in other areas, and I think now it's more of, I don't know if it's the clothes that they're wearing still. I think that's one, or the music they're listening to, but I think they've found other things to make people feel othered about.
Yeah, there's always something, right? If we work hard enough, we can make somebody feel bad and yourself feel superior. It's so unfortunate. So one of the things that I was aware of growing up was racism. Racism in the Valley, I think, is long and deep. I was instructed as a kid not to cross the tracks. My grandfather, who was from up around Dacona, would never call me Marty because he knew a Mexican man named Marty. He always had to call me Mardell. My family wouldn't let me come home with my child who was biracial. So I'm like, I say that to say racism is everywhere and not that it just exists in the Valley. But in context of the Valley, when you're talking about othering, one of the things that we do at Rocky Mountain Equality is we work at the intersections. We work at the intersection of LGBTQ identities and race and ethnicity. And we find that in our programming for kids of color, adults of color who happen to be in the LGBTQ programming, they want to do different things together. It's more of a cultural event, right? It's it's a party, it's a dance, it's those pieces. And in your work to pull this forward, can you describe a little bit about we don't need names, this is a small town, but where was the big pushback from? I know the Catholic Church is alive and well. We fight them on a statewide. Catholic Church, there's a lot of good things. My kids went to Catholic school, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of things that I disagree with them about, and I'm not a Catholic. But I have a sense of their overall thoughts. In getting this proclamation forward, as you're probably getting an earful, where was that earful coming from?
Yeah, no, for sure. We do have a ministerial alliance that kind of represents several of the churches. So there was a phone call, and I think that kind of an urge of not necessarily don't do this, but think please rethink this. But also a lot of community. There was phone calls and some messages, and then once we got to that point, we seen a lot of input on social media. But yeah, with it, we knew there was going to be some pushback, and I don't know how much I would say backlash but definitely pushback, definitely people, you know, I guess feeling uncomfortable and, just having to kind of work through that and possibly, hopefully, continue to talk through that. I know there is a lot there that is just misunderstood. And, I think the more that we can talk about that, and that's something that I've even learned, kind of through the years. But definitely with this is, it's a big part of all of this is educating. It's recognizing and educating. Where this community has the history and what this community um, has had to survive through, and the fight to get to where we are now. And I know you probably know, some of big key milestone dates. But I also know, that a lot of those are not too far off, over the last decade. And I know Colorado's probably in a lot better place than other states around the nation. But there's still a lot of work and a lot of misunderstanding that I think people just need to continue learning. And that's I think a big part of what this does. And then again, the month of June, being able to continue that in all the different ways.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One of the things that I think about, so like I lived in New York City, I lived in Seattle, I've lived in Houston, now I'm live in Longmont. And I meet, like in New York City, I met so many kids from the boondocks. Wasn't Colorado boondocks, it was the, Missouri or Kansas or places where they didn't fit in. Same for me, right? I'm supposed to be the happy married wife running a herd of cattle right now, that, with 15 grandkids. That didn't happen. But there wasn't a place for me there if I didn't do that, right? And so all of us, a bunch of us, not all, uh, moved away to cities where we could be accepted and build our own families, taking our knowledge with us. And so, as you think about, which is your job, to think about the economic development of Rocky Ford, of the Arkansas Valley, you're losing a big brain trust by not making it a place where, well, you're working on it, but by it not being an easy place to be different, to be LGBT in those communities. It was part of your like strategy and thinking about all this. I think one is probably for safety, and I read your bio, very focused on equity. Um, but do you see an economic connection there also?
Yeah, and that's right on that point. And it's kind of the two sides to it. It's one, um we don't want people to continue feeling like they have to leave, and find another place to be who they are. And that you are kind of a living proof of what that does. And then the other side of that is, we do have people who want to come to this area, come to Rocky Ford, or the Arkansas Valley. And they want to know that they're gonna have a safe place, and it's where they can create a new life. And a lot of what we are seeing is we're seeing a lot of higher income remote workers looking for that change of pace. So that's another part of that too, is I want people to know that Rocky Ford is an inclusive, it's a welcoming place. And my big thing is, I tell people I'm kind of the chief marketing officer or the chief salesman for Rocky Ford. That's kind of my role. And I want people to stay, and I want people to more people to come. And I think in all of this, it's building that openness, for people to want to be here.
Yeah. That's really smart thinking. There's a couple of Mexican restaurants, but the Mexican restaurant that I always stop on as I'm headed back up north, it's on the right on Highway 50. And they used to have a burrito called the Dallas Burrito. Do they still have that?
that'll be the Mission
Yes,
Deli,
yes.
and that's one of the grandsons. So I know all of their specials are named after the different grandkids.
Well, that one's named after Dallas Davis, who was a
Okay.
volunteer firefighter in Fort Collins, which I think you still probably have a volunteer crew. But he was struck and killed by lightning. And he was a regular there. And so they had the Dallas, I think it was a Dallas burrito, which is the biggest
Okay.
burrito you'd
Yeah.
ever want to see. But I love the Mexican food of Rocky Ford. And I know several folks of my age or a little younger who went to Rocky Ford High School and came out really smart. What do you think of your school district? Is that still they still pumping out really smart kids who go places?
I like to believe so. I know our class, we I think we were a really great group, and just seeing, some of them now. I know now we've kind of got to this predicament of, what do we do when we have two, exceptional, 4 point plus students. So I know we've had a couple of years where we've had co valedictorians.
Wow.
So that's great. And I know we're always sending kids up to CSU and CU, and then, a lot of other schools around the country.
We were always jealous of Rocky Ford living in Los Angeles. Is that still kind of the vibe down there? Does everybody want to be in Rocky Ford, but they live in Swink?
Yeah, I'd have to say so. For, it's either for the some of the sports, of course, the wrestling, but I think just also the feel of the community,
Yeah.
our treescapes, and you kind of transport into a different place when you come through town.
Yeah. Yeah, you really do. Um, One of the questions I want to talk to you about is water. So I really am like I still think I live in rural Colorado and I don't. I don't know as many people down there anymore. But I watch Lahana City Council, I watch Rocky Ford City Council, and I watch Sugar City's City Council. And Sugar City, from my vantage point on my Zoom at home in Longmont, looks like they're really struggling with water. And I know that the Colorado Water Compact is coming up for renegotiation. And I wonder if Arkansas Valley is working with the Attorney General on that. How are you all, like, what's the water situation? I know we're all in a drought, but what's the ongoing water situation for your farmers and ranchers? And what are you doing to make sure that the Arkansas Valley gets its fair share?
Yeah. No, so I think one of the points is, we're getting it more into drought conditions, but the water that's needed to grow, so that agricultural water is there. And I think one of the bigger parts of that is, just does the industry balance out? Do the books balance out with, the increased costs of inputs, and, what they're able to sell the commodities for? So what we've seen, and it's been over the last probably 30-40 years now, is, these owners, they have a resource that, is worth a lot of money, and, they have a decision that can be made of, do we pivot and move on, or do we continue in this industry? And that's a decision that's been made. It's not a decision necessarily that's, I know we kind of hear these scare words of, other municipalities stealing water, and, when you look at a lot of those sales were made with offers well above market price. So it wasn't necessarily that. It was kind of that, I guess, the Godfather adage of, being made an offer you can't refuse.
Yep.
But to get back to, I guess, the municipality side, the other issue when we think of Sugar City, and that, of course, Rocky Ford and a lot of us, but one of the big projects right now that we've been hearing about over the last couple of years, again, is the Arkansas Valley Conduit. And the purpose of the Arkansas Valley Conduit is to bring surface water from the Arkansas River up closer to the mountains, down here, to reduce the contaminants that it's getting traveling through the Arkansas River. a lot of the communities, Rocky Ford included, we all pull water from wells, so we're getting that groundwater, which does have high amounts of radium, uranium. And then once we're treating those, we're creating additional byproduct. So it's, do we continue pulling water from the ground and then having to do higher treatment, or do we look to pull surface water, which is going to have, less contaminants. So that's the decision point. And then, of course, this project has been ongoing since the 1960s.
Yeah.
So a lot of our engineers from across all the cities have tried their best to plan with also considering that being completed into the equation. And now, it's made its way 40, 50 years. And we're finally really getting some movement now. And we've also had a lot of communities that have, kind of stopped waiting and have just started to invest in infrastructure that can treat groundwater. So that's, Rocky Ford. We're one that, our surface water treatment plant has been inoperable since about 2011. So once we do get that conduit connected, we're also going to have to do some infrastructure work over there, because over the last, 2 decades, all of the investment has been in our treatment of our groundwater, our well water.
Thanks for that. I know it's not an LGBT topic per se, but we all need water. And I just thanks for all your work in that area. I want to ask one more question. So you don't know who I am, but I knew who you were because, pardon me, I was part of the group Communities Lead, Communities Thrive that secured the $36 million of ARPA money for small Latino and LGBT organizations throughout the state of Colorado. And you applied for a grant for Rocky Ford. I can't remember the name of your organization, but would you talk a little bit about the impact that you had and what that money was for?
Yeah, so Small Town Project, we co-founded Small Town Project in 2019, and originally we were focused on economic development and workforce development. And when COVID came, that beginning of 2020, everything shifted to addressing the food insecurity in the area. And now the Rocky Ford Food Share has become our largest program. And then we also run the Rocky Ford Youth Initiative. So we have an after school and summer program. But the nonprofit infrastructure grant, we had applied for that to expand our food access.
That's what I
and what we
remembered.
did
Yep. Mhm.
what we are doing is doing home delivery. So one of the things that we identified is we're one of 2 food pantries in Otero County, one of 2 food pantries in Otero and Crowley County, and then one of 3 food pantries one of 4 in Bent, Otero, Crowley. So there's not many there, providing that service. But the need is there, and the need has increased. So we're seeing people coming from even Otero County, even from Fowler over to Rocky Ford. That's about a 36-mile round trip. Someone coming from Ordway, someone coming from Sugar City. Again, we're looking at a 28 to 35-mile round trip. So what we looked at was, how many of the people, one, are, making that trek to come in and access food. 2, possibly not having their own transportation and having to work with a neighbor or someone else in the community to get a ride. And then 3, possibly rescheduling something else out of their day, or taking off work, whatever that is, to come out, and that's probably about a 2 to 3 hour time block. So kind of looking at all of those, we ran some numbers, and we looked at it, and and we are looking at those round trips versus us going and delivering to them. We've been able to show that we can save real money just on gas and transportation costs. But then also if we could come up with the formula to factor in the time spent and all the other things, we're saving, households real money, and, we're able to do it efficiently. So I know, right now we're doing, I want to say this last week, it was 142 households. So all of those 142 households, if you look at their round trip, we're hitting probably close to 1,000 miles that all of those people have driven to come to the food pantry and then go home. We're able to do those deliveries in it was about 240 miles. So it's a big saving. So, but for us, it was reducing transportation as a barrier to accessing food, and that's that nonprofit infrastructure grant. It supported us with our delivery van, and then some training, and then some staffing.
Fantastic. You are doing the work on the ground there. I really appreciate that. So I'm going to jump back to some LGBT issues, and so as we're coming to a close, another town. It's a little bigger than Rocky Ford. A town called Montrose. Probably been there. I've been there. It's a beautiful place. They have their city had done proclamations 2 years in a row, and this year they said, "You don't need a stinking proclamation. What are you people thinking about?" And so there's a big community uproar around it. They had enough votes, however they were counting them, to not do it. So there's a lot of pressure on people like you throughout, from the left side or the right side or the churches. What advice would you give another small town mayor who there's still time left in June, or in thinking about next year and bringing people along? What kind of advice would you give them to get to a point where the town could actually do a proclamation?
Um, it's something that I've kind of told myself, and it's, as mayor, I don't get to decide who matters and who doesn't matter in this community. So that's the big one, and that's the one that I hold on to and want to definitely express. And then the other piece of that is that, that education matters. We've seen how, when people are educated on a topic and, really are able to ask the questions, understand, I don't, I don't know if it's the fear of the unknown or what it is, or just being included in the conversation, maybe. I think the more that we can talk about it, the more that we can educate, the less we'll have people feeling like they're being attacked, or they're being, being
Just
forced into something.
Yeah, not feeling like we belong. One of the CDC, when it was actually a running organization into the federal government, said that the number one issue was loneliness. So if you start isolating somebody, pretty soon that loneliness turns into real physical issues. And I think that your stance made a little kid like me in your town think, you know what, there's probably nothing wrong with me. And that guy, Duane, he said so. And it's kind of that simple. So I want to say a big thank you to you for making a world of difference in rural Colorado. And I'm proud to know you. And because I do know how hard rural Colorado is around LGBT issues. And it took a good ally like you to finally get it done. So, sir, thank you for your time today. Happy Pride. If you ever make it up to the Boulder area, make sure and come in and say hi. If I ever make it down to Rocky Ford this summer for some melons and some pinto beans, I'll make sure and stop in the bookstore.
Awesome. Well, Marty, again, thank you. And I'm proud to be an ally, and proud to do the work that we can to advance equity. I know that's what it's all about. Is the more that we can strengthen everyone as a whole, the better off we're going to be.
That's exactly right. I'm with you. Thank you, Mayor. Have a great day.
All right, Marty. You too. Bye, everyone.
Proudly Out of Line is brought to you by Rocky Mountain Equality, with help from your host, Marty Moore, executive producer, Amy Zuckerman, audio producer, Theo Conover. Until next time,